So today we're with Dr. Jeanne Mortimer. She's an American biologist based in the Seychelles, and she's probably the world's expert on the Aldabra tortoise and sea turtles in the Indian Ocean, and could we say possibly the world?
Um, well, that's a bit. Well, first of all, my real expertise is with sea turtles.
Okay.
I do work with giant tortoises, but I think there are people who've devoted more of their life to working with giant tortoises. But sea turtles are definitely, my greatest kind of interest and strength. Um, I've been working with turtles in Seychelles since 1981.
Mhm.
But I've also worked in a lot of places around the world because I have kind of a global perspective on these things. And so I've worked in more than 20 countries on in 6 continents. But I'm most interested in the Western Indian Ocean. And so that is uh, that's really been my focus. Um, and or is my focus now, especially. I got my master's and my PhD both working with sea turtles in at University of Florida in the U.S.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate to work to be a student of Dr. Archie Carr, who has been and still considered to be kind of the father of sea turtle
Mhm.
biology and conservation. And
Mhm.
so, and working with him was great and gave me lots of opportunities and entrees into working in different places.
And you're based in Mahi now in the Seychelles?
Yeah, I actually have dual citizenship. I have Seychelles citizenship,
Hmm.
and I am based in Seychelles. I spend certainly like more than 11 months a year in Seychelles. Uh,
You have a unique nickname in the Seychelles, no? What do they call
yeah, a
you?
lot of people know me as Madame Torchi, which means kind of Madame Turtle. But Seychelles, no, they like to give nicknames to me.
Yeah.
So, um, but there's a lot of people in Seychelles who know me by that name, but maybe don't know my real name.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's okay.
So Seychelles has definitely come up on the radar recently because of some new development project that's happening at an ecologically sensitive area. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about Assumption Island and you've spent a lot of time on the Aldabra Atoll, and maybe tell us a bit about also why that place is worth protecting and what we have, to lose if the wrong kind of development takes place on Assumption Island.
Yeah, Assumption is it's an interesting situation. I think you're familiar with Aldabra Atoll, which is quite a large atoll, and it's the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's famous for its giant tortoises, and it also has the biggest sea turtle population currently in Seychelles. And uh, Assumption is a tiny little island. It's located only 20 kilometers away from Aldabra. It's much smaller than Aldabra. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that historically, probably, if you look at before people really started, exploiting the sea turtles, Assumption probably had the biggest sea turtle population in Seychelles.
Mhm.
And that is because Assumption has the best green turtle nesting beach
Mhm.
in the country.
Right.
It is 7 kilometers of nesting beach,
Mhm.
and it's a perfect green turtle beach. And what makes a green turtle beach, well, green turtles, will nest on different kinds of beaches. And for example, at Aldabra, there's 5 kilometers of nesting beach, and it's scattered around the outside of this very kind of treacherous atoll with lots of, limestone champignon, what they call champignon, like means like mushroom, but
Mhm.
it's like a limestone spikes, on everything.
Mhm.
And so that has protected Aldabra historically from overexploitation of the turtles because it was so difficult to get to all these beaches, especially when the tide is low
Mhm.
and you can't travel. So the tide is king on Aldabra,
Mhm.
and uh, that protected the turtles. Except in front of the settlement where we have 2 kilometers of beach, which is adjacent to the settlement. And in the old days, when the settlement was mostly involved with exploitation, of resources, including turtles.
Mhm.
People really killed every turtle pretty much on that beach. But because they could not easily get to the other beaches, those beaches thrived.
Mhm.
And when Aldabra became protected in 1968, um, people had pretty much wiped out the nesting population on the settlement beach of Aldabra, the 2 kilometers. And when I first came to Aldabra in 1981, um, there was very little nesting. It was like maybe one turtle a night or one turtle every 2 nights. It was very, very sparse along this 2 kilometers of beach.
Well,
But because of protection, the population was able to bounce back fairly slowly, but it did bounce. And it nowadays, I'm hearing reports that they're finding 75 to 80 turtles coming up in one night on this stretch of beach. And there's evidence that it's going to continue to increase because of the protection.
right.
So this what I'm saying here is relevant to Assumption, because Assumption has, as I say, a better beach. It has a very deep offshore approach,
Mhm.
which also makes it a very good tourist beach. Because on many beaches in Seychelles, when the tide is low, especially in the outer islands, when the tide is low, you really can't you don't have access to the water. You've got a reef flat in front of you. And you have to wait till the tide comes up before you can go back into the water, for swimming or, whatever it is you might be doing recreationally. But at Assumption, it's a deep offshore approach. It's always accessible. So it's always accessible to turtles. So that makes it, very good for turtle nesting as well as for human tourism.
Yeah.
And this is a long stretch of beach. It's altogether there's about 7 kilometers of beach on Assumption, which is more than on Aldabra.
Mhm.
Um, but like Aldabra, the turtles were nesting on the beach, which was very accessible, on this main beach, was very accessible to humans because it was right in front of the settlement. So you had this long stretch of beautiful beach backed by the settlement. And for much of the history of Assumption, there was guano mining going
Right.
on. And so guano is bird droppings.
Mhm.
It's a type of phosphate, which have been used for fertilizer. And it, in the past, especially, has been very important. And so they did a lot of mining of guano, and they needed a lot of men to do so. And Assumption had at one time probably hundreds, at least 300 men staying there uh, adjacent to that nesting beach. And so at night, this was at a time when there was a lot of turtles being exploited for sale to Europe,
Mhm.
and what was being sold was mostly callipee. And callipee is the cartilage inside we have the upper shell and the lower shell, and it's inside the plastron, the lower shell.
Mhm.
And it's what people made turtle soup out of.
Wow.
It's, very cartilaginous stuff. So that was the main export product. So that meant that you could kill a turtle and just take that callipee and let the rest rot if you can still make a profit. So it was quite a wasteful form of exploitation. And this callipee would be removed from the turtle, dried, and dried down to just maybe 2 kilos of dried material. And that was the main export product.
Mhm.
So these turtles that were coming up on this beach, backed by a settlement full of guano workers, were being killed, very, steadily. So the population of nesting turtles at Assumption was much reduced.
Mhm.
And by the time I was visiting there in the early 1980s, when I first started working in Seychelles, um, the there were very few turtles nesting on Assumption, maybe only 200. My estimate was about 200 a year,
Mhm.
which is quite low.
Yeah.
Um, and but with protection, those numbers have been going up and going up and going up.
Mhm.
And if you look at the situation on Aldabra, you can see that protection really does help
Mhm.
and allows the turtle population to rebound.
Mhm.
And so there's absolutely no reason to not expect that the Assumption green turtle population can easily become as big or bigger than that on Aldabra, which is now our biggest population in the Seychelles, and it's one of the biggest populations in the Western Indian Ocean. Um, and so this is my concern with developing Assumption. I'm not opposed to developing. I've always thought that what we found in Seychelles is that tourism and conservation go very well together if it's done properly. Because, for example, in the past, people were killing turtles on these outer islands. But when you put a hotel on the island and you have people who want to come and see live turtles and they're bringing in money, all of a sudden, the management realizes, oh gosh, we have to stop killing these things because the more we have, the better it is for the tourism and the more money we can make from live turtles. And we've had that model that we've used throughout the outer islands, and throughout the inner islands too. And it's worked really well. And so our turtle populations are increasing. So that's just to say that I do think that the concept of tourism at Assumption is not a bad idea. But and especially with green turtles, which nest at night, because when a turtle is nesting at night, people are sleeping.
Yeah.
And then when the people are up in the daytime running around on the beach or operating boats or whatever, the turtles are offshore, usually sleeping, farther away from the beach. So what's most important is that whatever development takes place needs to be done in a, quote, turtle-friendly manner.
Right.
And this concept of turtle-friendly development has become a real science over the last several decades. We know how to do it.
Right.
It's we know what works, we know what doesn't work.
Right.
The most important thing is lighting, artificial lighting.
Yeah.
And so what needs to be done is that if you put development along the coastline, you need to make sure that there's no artificial light visible on the beach. Right. That also means that you need to have a good setback line so that you don't put your buildings right on the beach. You need to go back. Yeah. And have a good setback, and make sure that you're shading the building. And you can do that, I think, without undermining the joy of the tourists, because when you're inside your building, you can do whatever you want. Just make sure you've got shades on the windows, right. And the light is not going outside. You also have to make sure that you don't have artificial light that's just shining all over the place, because that will frighten the turtles away and disorient the hatchlings. So
but there are developers there now, as some people who don't want to be named have told me, that they've come through to Aldabra and we're not allowed to take photos. They're not allowed to get off the pathway. It seems like what's being developed is in a kind of veil of secrecy, and people who are concerned about nature think that building on this 7-kilometer strip of sand, which is potentially maybe a more important sea turtle nesting site than the one on Aldabra, may be lost forever. Because if the homes, they say it's a hotel, but most people assume it's luxury private dwellings. How can you get people to comply when there aren't even environmentalists there now? And you talk about lights, but I mean, turtles lay eggs in the sand. Who's going to protect the nesting sites? I mean, I know in Israel, for instance, there are 600 volunteers that come out during turtle nesting season to protect clutches of eggs, and in wild areas. So it seems like you're providing the science, but who's going to provide the police in this scenario?
That's a problem. The sketches I've seen of the buildings that are planned, well, first of all, my understanding, and I haven't been out there recently, so I don't, this is not based on firsthand information, but I think it's pretty reliable secondhand information. We're planning something like 37 villas all along this beach, and these will be big villas, and they were they're planned to be quite close to the beach.
Mhm.
And the pictures I've seen of the what it's going to look like, lots of picture windows, with lots of light shining out.
Right.
So I think if that is how it's done, that can pretty much finish off that beach
Mhm.
because they just won't be able to,
Mhm.
they won't be compatible with that level of disturbance right adjacent to their nesting beach.
And what
So
about
that is very
and
worrisome.
people walking on the beach? Is there a concern there? Like how would turtle eggs be protected if
Yeah, I mean, walking on the beach is not always is not great, especially if you've got so many people that you've got. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of people out on this development. Like, you say it might be kind of a private thing, so there might not be that many people, and they might not be the type of people who like to walk around on a hot beach. But um, uh, that is a consideration. But my biggest concern is habitat destruction. In Seychelles, if you look at turtle conservation over the now many decades. When I first came to Seychelles in 1981, our biggest problem was that people were killing them all.
Mhm.
In Seychelles, the turtles were particularly vulnerable because Seychelles hosts some of the most important nesting populations for both green turtles and hawksbills in the Western Indian Ocean, and arguably worldwide too. I mean, they're globally important populations. And when a turtle is nesting, that's when it's most vulnerable. That's the most vulnerable life stage.
Mhm.
And so if you can make sure that the the females are protected and are able to actually lay their eggs and the eggs are able to hatch,
Mhm.
that's super important. Once they get back in the water and go back to their feeding areas, which can be thousands of kilometers away, hundreds or thousands of kilometers away, they're going to be in the water. And some of them may be killed by things like, fishing nets and so on, but they're not anywhere near as vulnerable as they are when they're all aggregated on a tiny little nesting beach.
Mhm.
And another thing to consider is that the females are the most important life stage
Mhm.
of sea turtles because we now know that both green turtles and hawksbills take probably 30, 35 years from the time they hatch out of their own egg until the time they come up to lay their own eggs.
Mhm.
And so, they have a very long age to maturity. So
Mhm.
by the time these females come up, they are super valuable to the population.
Mhm.
And we also know that once they start nesting, they can nest multiple times in a season, but not every year. So for example, the green turtles that might be nesting on Assumption
Mhm.
are probably nesting an average of 6 or 7 times in
Mhm.
one season,
Mhm.
and then go away for maybe four years, maybe 5 years, and then come back and nest again. And so it's really important that but they can come back, many times over a period of like 30 years.
Mhm.
So it's once you get a female that has reached adulthood, they're very important, very, very valuable.
Mhm.
And you have to be careful not to kill them. So going back to when I first came to Seychelles, this was a big problem because people were killing females, and the law at that time said, "Oh, well, you can kill the female, but just bury the eggs." Well, burying a bloody set of eggs is not going to be very helpful because it probably won't hatch anyway. And also, this is just one out of many reproductive exercises that the turtle should be engaging in. And so it's not enough to just cut its head off and say, "Oh, we buried its eggs." You're losing a lot. And Seychelles have been very good about understanding the importance of protecting this life stage. And I've been really very happy with the way, the turtles have been protected in Seychelles. And yes, we do have poaching. I'm not saying that everything's perfect, but definitely the attitude of people has really changed, and they realize what an important resource this is, and how important it is for them to be good stewards of this resource, and they in turn can use it to make money because they find that the tourists loves the turtles
Yeah.
and are happy to when a turtle sees when a tourist sees turtles during their holiday, they usually I often hear them saying, "That was the best time of the whole trip."
Sure.
So it really, it's something that people really do appreciate.
Yeah,
So
my
so
children were part of something we were in Thailand and there was a turtle release day, right? All the baby turtles, and my children could go and put them into the water and it feels meaningful. I don't,
Yeah, no, it's magical. It's magical. And people,
magical.
it will stay with people, it really, it
So,
makes,
but
it makes,
what would you like as a conservationist and as someone with experience, who knows the way the world works, what would you like to see happen at Assumption Island?
well,
Um,
I think the most important thing for turtles now moving forward is protecting habitat.
mhm,
We've done a pretty good job of keeping people from cutting their heads off,
mhm,
but um, the habitat absolutely needs to be preserved because if you destroy the nesting habitat,
mhm,
you're finished. I mean, you're not gonna, that's the end of the nesting.
mhm,
And so what I would really like to see at Assumption is to make sure that first of all, it should read. I don't think that it's a good idea to have villas all along the entire nesting beach. I think you know it would be good to to have fewer villas and have some of the beach, maybe pick out some of the most important sections of beach and make sure that they are really
mhm,
completely protected and away from human influence. But another problem really is to make sure that what development there is far enough back and that the artificial lighting restrictions are enforced. Uh, and the issue of lighting, it's not just turtles. Um, Another thing about Assumption is one of the has some of the most interesting insect populations in Seychelles. It has the best, for example, the best butterfly populations
wow.
anywhere in Seychelles.
Mhm,
And people don't really appreciate this because
mhm,
people often don't appreciate the importance of insects.
mhm,
But there's lots of insects, and people who have been studying the insects out there find that the insect community is tremendous.
mhm.
And insects can be devastated by artificial lighting,
Yeah.
you know. And so, one of the things I had heard about the Assumption development was that it's only going to have a footprint of 1% of the island.
Mhm,
Well, okay, maybe your actual construction, on the ground is 1% of the island. But when you have artificial light coming out of these structures and on the roads and wherever people are going to want lights, um, your impact can be close to 100% because the light can go
correct.
everywhere.
And
And what's going to happen is the insects attracted to the lights. This irritates people. People don't like having insects flying at them, and then they're going to start spraying.
right.
And so that is likely to destroy the insect population. There's also some very good bat populations on the island, which eat insects, and they'll be impacted also by the lack of insects if it eventually comes to that. So the systems are
Yeah.
very complicated, and people really need to take it seriously.
Spraying for sure, because tourists seem to have zero tolerance when it comes to beetles, mosquitoes, any kind of larvae, for
Even
instance.
beautiful insects. I mean, and I can understand that they don't really understand insects,
Yeah.
but what they really need to understand is that insects are very important for the ecosystem.
So what about
And
proposing to the Qataris who seem to be going ahead anyway with the Seychelles government, despite the concerns of the conservationists, that they create some sort of butterfly museum and insect, I don't know, catalog of what's happening. What is there now in Assumption Island? We know that in the United Arab Emirates, for instance, there's a great interest in soil. There's a soil museum, and they're trying to show the world that they're very now interested in environmentalism and conservation. Um, get them to earmark money for conservationists to be studying those things on Assumption Island.
yeah, I think that would be helpful. And I think this kind of study, an extensive study needs to be done ahead of time, not something that documents, well, this is what used to be here. Now
Right.
it's all gone. You know,
Well, well,
it
I think I spoke to one conservationist, and maybe it was Yaniv Levy, actually Dr. Yaniv Levy, and he said that as far as he knows, there hasn't been a extensive survey on sea turtles on Assumption Island. Is that correct? I
No,
mean,
he's right. And I would whenever I mean I've spent time on Assumption over the years, and whenever I was staying out there, I would every morning walk around the entire island to get an idea about how the turtles were coming up around the beach. Uh, on the beaches. And uh, but it really it hasn't been as studied as I think is necessary. Especially, it's such an interesting situation. You've got this island in close proximity to Aldabra, which has been well studied in terms of the turtles. But it's almost like some people don't want to, you know, if we were to show how important it is, that could cause problems. Like, oh,
Problems with who?
well, problems with someone who might want to develop without regulations. And so I think that uh, it's I mean, on many of the other islands, many of the outer islands, the developers have been very receptive to advice, you know, in terms of because they realize the importance that their clientele was really interested in seeing turtles, for example, and appreciating the wildlife. And we've done a really good job, I think, on places like Alphonse Island and Desroches, trying to keep the lighting, the damage from the artificial lights really low, because the developers realized that this was all part of the package for their guests. Um, and but I mean, I have not been involved at all with this development.
Why aren't they calling you in? Like this seems to me to be the obvious like missing link in whatever could be a problem here is bringing you in. Why, like, have you been
Yeah, I mean,
informed? Have you
yeah,
like,
because I'm happy to work with people. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be development.
yeah.
I just think it has to be intelligent development.
Mhm.
And as I say, this turtle-friendly development has become a science. I mean, there's parts of the world, like places like in Australia and Florida, where it's now mandated that if you're going to develop along the coastline in a turtle nesting area,
Yeah,
there's certain things you've got to do
that's obvious,
and in order to get
right?
a permit.
It's obvious.
What's that?
That's obvious. It
Yeah,
should be the
and
law in the
this is
Seychelles, right? Like, why isn't the government doing this?
well, I don't know. I can't speak for the government, but
Do you have free speech in the
all I can
Seychelles?
say is that
Do you have free
but what
speech?
I want to say is it's feasible. It's feasible to control this, you
Okay,
know.
it's feasible.
But I can't. I don't know. What other considerations there might be.
Okay.
But I'd certainly be happy to work with the developers and try to minimize the impact. But
So Marco Francis, he wants to, he's running to be the president of Seychelles in the fall, and he suspects some sort of back end deal in the sale of the island to the Qataris, and his fear is that this will become a foreign outpost. They will have a private airstrip. They won't even have to pass through one of the Seychelles main international airports. And people will just be coming from wherever to Assumption, doing whatever they want. And like think from a biology perspective, I mean, if you're bringing in apples or cabbages or meat or whatever, right, from another country, another continent, what does that mean in terms of, contaminating the local biodiversity or the insects or the bats or, higher up on the food chain, the turtles? And what does all this mean? For so long, this Aldabra was so remote that you really had to be extremely wealthy in the scheme of things to be able to go there. I understand they dust off hand fans and check the treads of your shoes, in the soles of your shoes for seeds. I mean, if there is now a playground of people with private yachts and sea-doos, how in the world is this cross-contamination between two locations going to be controlled?
yeah, I think it's a very valid concern. Very, very valid concern.
It
So.
just seems like a catastrophe. I mean, environmentalists I spoke with said it's an end. It's an end to this Eden, this atoll. I mean, it's these little ecosystems they develop for millions and millions of years, and we see all over the world what international trade does to forests. What could it do to
Mhm.
this small precious outpost of evolution?
Yeah. No, I think it's a valid concern, and I'm not sure what, you know, what can be done about it, but if, I'd certainly be happy to try to, you know,
Do you feel
help make sense of it all.
do you feel angry? Are you invested? Are you just like, oh, such is the way of the world? I mean, do you have any emotional
Well, I
connection?
mean, I've been working with sea turtles since 1973, so I've seen a lot of stuff, and I've seen good stuff and I've seen bad stuff, and uh, I guess I try to invest in what I can do something about,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
rather than angst over things I can't do anything about, although it might make me very sad.
Okay. I appreciate speaking with you. Um, what can people in the world who are watching this video, if there's anything, I mean, everyone wants to do their part. Is there something a teenager could do to understand or to help animal sea turtle conservation? Any ideas?
I guess I think that I don't know, I haven't thought about this, but maybe it's important for everybody to try to take a broad view of things and understand that the whole world is very interconnected, and that I think there's a lot of pressure on like there's a tendency for people to say, oh, reuse, recycle,
Mhm.
do your part. But I
Use
think,
paper straws. Oh, I'm saving
yeah,
the world.
the whole plastic straw thing is kind of silly. Um, I think what needs to be done is we need to work with to motivate our governments and
Mhm.
motivate big companies to change their policies,
Mhm.
because that's the only way you're really gonna, make a change. It's not people they want to put it like things like control of plastics. They want to put it onto the backs of the individual. Oh, don't use so many paper bags.
Right.
No, that's not. I mean, yes, I mean you can. That's a good thing to do, but the most important thing is that the policies change so that they're not making so much stupid plastic that is, you
Mhm.
know, unnecessary.
Putting research
And
into new kinds of plastics that may be
exactly, and
not totally biodegradable.
exactly, like for example, in Seychelles, at the University of Seychelles, we've got a program going where we're looking at the use of seaweeds, to make bioplastic,
Mhm.
that might be used for things like food containers, or textiles or things like that. It's but I mean that's just a small thing, but I think there's a lot of pressure from from the really super wealthy big companies and governments are not, they're concerned about their own propagating wealth, and I think that it's really important to put pressure on companies, big companies and governments, to take responsibility for
Mhm.
this, and don't try to make people feel guilty that, oh, I shouldn't be carrying a plastic bag. No, they should be designing things so that you don't need a plastic bag. It's kind of um
Mhm.
uh like that. And there's things that individuals can do for sure, but they're not individuals aren't going to be able to solve the problem. The problem has to be solved high up,
Mhm.
and it's a question of people becoming aware, and putting pressure. And I realize that a 12-year-old maybe isn't going to be in a position to do that, but a 12-year-old can become enlightened about the problem.
Well,
And
12-year-old children of the Qatari investors who may be going to this island might see some nesting female turtles coming up on the beach and say, hey, mom, hey, dad, maybe we need to do something about this, right?
yeah,
Uh,
that's a great point. That's a
right?
great point.
Maybe
And
you could be
because
the one maybe
yep,
you could be educating them. You could be the
yeah. Oh, I
Dr.
think it's
Jekyll.
really it's very important to deal with young people, because it's to some extent, I suppose, when people get older and they're invested, they're economically invested in certain things, and let's say they're making a good living, they don't necessarily want to change. It's like, well, yeah, but it works for me. Whereas kids are coming up and they haven't, been stuck into any particular way of making a living, or and they can start to look at the world with fresh eyes and say, well, this is valuable, and this is valuable, and this is valuable, and maybe, maybe change their
Mhm.
way of moving forward a little bit, and try to also encourage people around them to look at these things through their eyes and say, look, this is really nice and needs to be protected. And uh,
Thank you so
let's do
much.
things a bit differently.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's really, really important to get like a more rounded view of what's happening, from a true turtle expert on the Seychelles.